All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us here at CQ Advocacy for Justifying Your Government Relations Existence. And I think any of us, no matter what industry we're in, we have to kind of justify our existence. I know I certainly do. So this topic is a particularly good one, and I know from the number of people who signed up to register, a lot of folks out there have to justify themselves and justify their jobs. So thanks for joining us today. We have a great lineup for you and some really good guest panelists. I wanted to start by reiterating who we are and what we do here at CQ Advocacy. We have two advocacy platforms, CQ Ignite and CQ Engage. CQ Ignite is kind of our starter, entry-level, if you like, advocacy platform, and CQ Engage is our behemoth of a platform. We have CQ Knowledgeist, which is our congressional directory. CQ Advocate Acquisition, which is our micro-targeting or digital advocacy tool, and then CQ Converge, which is our Hill Day or event app, and of course CQ Connectivity, which I look after, and that's our resource for all government relations and advocacy folks out there. So let's get going, justifying your government relations existence. Our panelists today are Joshua Huberski, who you'll probably be familiar with. Josh is the Director of Advocacy at the Independent Community Bankers of America, and he's also the Chairman of the Grassroots Professional Network. I'm delighted to be joined by Dr. David Rehr. He is a professor at the Scalia Law School at George Mason University and the former CEO of the National Association of Broadcasters and the National Beer Wholesalers Association. And then finally, we have Megan McCoskey. Megan is our CQ Advocacy Product Manager, and she works closely with nonprofits, trade associations, and corporate clients to help them leverage tools to make the most of their advocacy platforms and thus justify their existence and their jobs. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Josh first.
Thank you, Ann. Thanks for having Dr. Rehr and I. We are very excited to discuss this topic. We recently did a joint op-ed for the Hill on this given topic and provided some insights on that, and we'll kind of expand upon that. But I'm honored to have, my colleague here to kind of justify my own existence for grassroots to somebody that was a former CEO in the association world. So I definitely brought my notebook to take some notes today. So, Dr. Rehr?
Well, thank you, Joshua. Thank you all for being on the phone, watching this in your computers. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. Hopefully it'll provide you some great value. We've got lots of slides, interesting slides, lots of ideas. The one big takeaway, other than those which are up now, is you have to kind of apply our viewpoints to whatever your organization is. I've found when I teach and even when I was running two associations that value and what your members expect or what your folks expect really depends on the culture of the organization, and you want to be sure that when you're talking about value and your results and what you're doing, it's consistent with that culture. So the big four takeaways are, of course, understanding the impetus of justifying your GR existence. A lot of people who come from politics, who are in Washington, go, well, why do I have to justify anything? Well, you do. It's part of the world. It's increasingly more important, and we'll talk about why. Kind of setting some annual expectations of GR goals and activities. Okay, this is a secret tip from Dr. Rehr, who's been doing this for 25 years. If you set the right expectations with people, you always get the right result. It's when they don't have expectations, they think of all sorts of different things which can get you into trouble and put you in harm's way. Tracking and reporting key metrics, and then tips on justifying GR engagement and activities, some fun things that Joshua and I have both been involved in, which seem to work well. So, and feel free to jump in here, because this is going to be like, frick and frack today, and I'm frick. Anyway, well, you're sitting there at the computer thinking, well, why do we have to justify our existence? I mean, our corporation, our association, our nonprofit, our professional society, they know, right? They understand how important it is. We live in Washington. It's the largest capital, the most important city in the world. Why do we have to take time from our busy schedule and do this justification? Well, let's view it not as what we're doing, but as our customers or our clients or the people who pay our salaries. GR is always seen as a cost of business. From my first days working for the National Federation of Business to my last days working at the National Association of Broadcasters, whatever the members would do, they'd come in and they go, why are we spending money on this? We need to make money. Our job is to be profitable as companies. Business cultures of organizations are different, but GR has kind of a political, government, increasingly focused business culture. Uncertainty and exponential change in markets forces organizations to be even more prudent. 15 years ago, I would say the flow to GR, the flow to PAC education, the flow to a lot of grassroots education was probably more available. People had more money to spend on these things. Good or bad, with the internet, it seems like it's driving costs on everything down, and everyone's looking for every way to minimize their costs of their businesses to maximize profit. So, and there's lots of uncertainty in markets, even with the stock market doing well. People are nervous about tomorrow. You know, is Amazon going to control their business, et cetera? So they just are looking to be as prudent as possible with resources. Former businessman Donald Trump puts more media pressure on companies in Washington. We'll talk about that more in just a minute. And then there's been, and I'm not pro or con, I'm just trying to describe the world in which we live. There are more kind of activists, some might call them social activists, who are now more aggressive towards business, either in the government relations field, in the banking field, in the beer field, whatever the field is, and GR can have unintended negative consequences if things aren't handled correctly.
Two important points that you bring up there, and I think that it's we've discussed these on previous webinars. There's an intersection between the different functions of an organization, whether it be corporate or association, in the grassroots role, because it's not really fully direct lobbying. You have some of that piece. You have some of the PAC education, but you're working a lot with membership, and you're working a lot with communications. So when you're working with those different units of the organization, you're providing, and it's essential to provide metrics and tracking mechanisms like they do. So conversions to new members, conversions to new advocates, there's a parallel on that side of things, which, you know, I'm biased working in the grassroots space, but those metrics are what I'm looking at for the most part. And then your last point there, Dr. Rehr, is the social activists. I would agree with you that there are a lot more corporations now that have previously just depended solely on their trade association to do all of their government relations work. Now they're going out on a limb and taking more of an active role. I would not say that the association is no less important. Right. Associations are incredibly important, but now those corporations are saying, all right, there's business to be had, and I can leverage GR and grassroots and communication as a function to eat up that market. And I know we'll talk a little bit more about that later.
So just quickly, let me just go to the next slide. Government relations is growing important within most organizations. Josh talked on that. Grassroots PAC functions provide hard numbers to people. We know how much money we raised. We know how many functions we had. Direct lobbying is advancing in technology. Data is becoming more readily available, and modern lobbyists must be more equipped with key online and offline communication skills. And then the growth in number of meetings, interactions, letters to the Hill. Josh and I both agree that it's really kind of an information cluttered field. You've got thousands of lobbyists, thousands of grassroots people. You know, probably this week we have dozens of fly-ins. We have more people communicating with Congress in more ways than ever, and all that becomes kind of information clutter. And how do you break through that to be effective?
Yeah, it really is too much information for the most part, and I think a lot of times now organizations are focusing on quality rather than quantity. It doesn't make sense to make the most noise or spend the most money. You have to get your message in a creative way that's compelling, and whether that means spending $0 and doing it in a very targeted way, that's important. And you're really talking to two audiences. You're talking to the regulators and elected officials, but you're talking through your membership in the grassroots sense. So you have to worry about getting cluttered in both areas.
Right.
You know, Congress
exactly
is getting
right.
a million messages,
Right.
but your members, you know, they need to for my organization, they need to run their community bank, and they don't need to be getting inundated about
That's right.
grassroots action alerts
And they're
all the
hearing
time.
from their spouses in their church or their synagogue. There's a lot of stuff goes on in people's world.
Yep.
And how do you cut through all that?
Being cognizant on timing and segmentation, I think that is key to look at, especially when you're justifying your existence. Did we target our membership, and did we target our elected officials at the right time and the right segment of them, not just the shotgun blast?
Yeah. This is just a quick slide. I typed into Google government relations, and these books came up, and this meme came up, and, you know, some of it is a little less flattering than we as advocates would enjoy. So that's what the CEO or the CEO's spouse sees, or the senior vice president of finance sees, who may be just looking at numbers all day and doesn't realize that government relations protects and advances the bottom line of the company.
It's the scarlet L, as people say. And then you go to the Thanksgiving table, and what do you do for a living? Oh, I'm a lobbyist. Well, what does that mean? What do you really do?
Yeah. I know in my own case, I come from kind of a blue-class working background in the Midwest, and I remember telling my mother that I was a lobbyist, and she thought I actually bought people. And I was corrupt. She's like, you got to get out of this. And I'm like, no, it's fine, it's fine. Your son is very ethical and very legal. Corporate and association engagement. Associations, as Josh mentioned, are seen as the outlet on behalf of trades and companies. But, as you mentioned, some companies are going out on their own, either because they can see more business possibilities. They have a particular nuance. I know this is happening in the food marketing industry. The Grocery Manufacturers Association has seen some of their members go out on their own because of their particular sales availability on natural foods versus GMOs, et cetera. The Trump tweet is no longer lethal, but still very serious.
Absolutely.
Right? And there needs to be all this interdepartmental cooperation in case there's a crisis.
Yeah, and I think that is important. We talked a lot last year through the Grassroots Professional Network in different forums about the Trump tweet, how to respond, how to create a crisis communications plan, and then also with a series that we do with Morning Consult on brands and how they are responding to the administration, how are they engaging in government relations functions. Do they see business opportunities, or is it a detriment to their business?
I'm sure you're all aware of this, but we can look, unfortunately, at the recent example of Starbucks. Within 18 hours, Starbucks, because of an unfortunate way it treated customers, is now in harm's way and is doing all these things to try to make up. But with many people that I've talked to, it's already too late.
Yep.
You know, so you don't have this, well, we have a week, we have 2 weeks, we have a month. No, you have to be ready, and you have to be willing to execute almost instantaneously to protect your brand. Well, you're in a company, you're wondering, the CEO wants all these metrics. Well, why don't they get it? You know, we send them a memo that says we're fighting this bill or we're supporting this bill. Here's just a short example of the backgrounds of all the CEOs in most major U.S. corporations. Nowhere do you see government relations. You see finance, operations, some legal, that might have a GR component, division CEO. Essentially, the culture in which these people live is separate from the culture of advocacy and government relations. Now, I would argue they may advocate because they're selling things and marketing things to people, but that's not how they think about it. And I think that's why you need to be extra careful, maybe emphatic, maybe well-planned to understand how to talk to them about what you do in GR and what impact it has.
And a lot of times they might be based outside of Washington, D.C., and they get, limited interaction with D.C. They're, the folks there in government relations are seen to be in that ivory tower and not accessible to, people in Chicago and New York.
Right.
So it's a culture thing where, to justify your existence, you also have to explain and educate what you do.
That's exactly right. Leadership general views on government relations lobbying. They don't really understand what GR does. They're under incredible pressures to reduce costs, whether you know it or not. Most CEOs are, and I even remember this when I was at the beer wholesalers and the NAB, I always had constant pressures, but I would smile. I would tell the staff everything's fine while I'm working about how are we going to pay the $13 million in the pension fund, But you can't sweat as a leader. So they may be thinking about that, and it may not affect you, but that's in their mind. They may not hear from you unless there's an emergency. And we have many people, unfortunately, in our business who wait till there's a big problem and then basically turn on the red spinning light. I would not do that. I would keep people informed along the way. The GR may not be the direct reports for many. It's sales, corporate secretaries, marketing, general counsel. Leadership might distrust or have angst against elected officials. I've met hundreds of business owners who, when I come in and say, I'm from Washington and I'm here to help you, they look at me and go, really, David? You've got to be kidding me, right? Because they're not hostile to government because they pay their taxes. They're nervous because generally government means bad things will happen to them. And then they also could be nervous about shareholders, marketers, or customers viewing government relations.
Can I jump in there? You made an interesting point, David, about how a lot of the folks who end up as CEOs don't come from, or never, according to that statistic, come from the GR department. But kind of some of that is on GR folks, too. They, CEOs and people in finance and marketing and sales, we're all very focused on the bottom line. We're constantly thinking about the bottom line. How is that changing? What do we do about that? Whereas GR folks, I think, don't ever bring themselves and their contribution back to that bottom line. And once they start doing that, then, they have much more kind of opportunity to maybe become CEOs, but at least speak the same language, right? Right.
And we're going to talk some tips about that because you're absolutely right. I think that's the way ultimately you're able to not only justify your existence, but probably add to your resources by demonstrating real value to your ultimate customer, who's the leader of the organization.
And here's some tips that I put together, and David, feel free to chime in here if you agree or disagree on any of them, but track all quantifiable metrics from the beginning. I'm not saying report those, but track as much as you can, because chances are if you're like, I don't need this piece of information, 3 months later, somebody's going to want it in the organization. So combine hard numbers with anecdotal evidence. So I will always get the metrics, like, for instance, we had our fly-in recently.
Right.
You have the number of meetings.
Great pictures, by the way.
Thank you. Thank you. 330 congressional meetings. We hit all of these offices. That is a hard number that you report. But the story about your member walking past two other people that were waiting in the office for staff-level meetings, and your member goes right to meet with a member of Congress, that's a nice piece of anecdotal evidence that your CEO wants to hear. Collect information across GR units. So, and this is coming really from a grassroots perspective, but I like to know what's going on in the different units of congressional relations, regulatory policy, even state relations, PAC and grassroots. And a lot of times for activation's sake, and I would say that my colleagues and friends in the PAC would want this also, having all of that information, if you're coming to do a fly-in or you're sending messages and signing petition, you're more likely to donate to the PAC than you are if you don't participate in the organization at all. And that even goes into membership. If you're attending a seminar on bank education, you're going to be more likely to engage with the organization elsewhere. Process all of this information into digestible communications, both member-facing and internal. So I think justifying your government relations existence is not only to, the C-suite. That's important, and that's the crux of what we've been discussing, and also senior leadership. But it's also important to justify your existence to your membership, who are, they employ you.
Right.
That's who you serve.
Yeah.
The association world, you exist for that. The customers on the corporate side also showcase that. That's a little more difficult because you don't want to share as much information and it's more protected. But in the association world, if there's good metrics to report, or even metrics of, hey, we need to do better, we need to send more letters to Congress, we need to send more petitions, I like showcasing that information. Figure out what needs to be a report and what needs to be uttered in a meeting. I think that's the most critical thing. Because you can write a white paper on everything that's going, on. As I mentioned, I'm tracking everything. I have dashboards and databases, but at the end of the day, it might be a sentence in a staff meeting that I need to report rather than this. I also love infographics, and putting those pieces together. When we run grassroots campaigns and looking at the end result, putting it together in an infographic, and that serves the dual purpose. That goes to the association, all the employees, and it can also go to our members. Kill two birds with one stone.
So and to your point of sometimes you just want to utter things, if you're involved in a legislative issue and the Speaker of the House just told you he's with you, you may not want to put it out there publicly because he's getting lots of attention, and he does. And then if you have any adversaries or people who might not want you to achieve that goal, they will then fire up their machine, and they will be battling with you in the halls of Congress. So I think the biggest thing to think about is you're sitting in your office, you're watching the webinar, you're saying, okay, what can I really do? Be proactive. Don't wait for the email or the letter to come from the CEO or the senior leaders to say, justify your existence. Get ahead of it. I always love to be on offense. Offense is better than playing defense. And just think about what can we do, as Josh talked about, to illustrate to people that it's really important. So government, this is just some kind of thoughts as an observer. Government relations means more than just watching Congress. People, your corporate headquarters, your association headquarters is in Chicago. Why are we spending this money? Well, it's about more than just going to Capitol Hill. It's also all around Washington. Things are being done almost every minute of every day that will ultimately have an effect on your bottom line. And I pulled up some examples here of even with President Trump as a businessman, he's getting rid of some regulations. We currently have 178,277 pages of regulations. And they're not declining. They're slowing, but it's not declining. So depending on your industry, particularly if you're in energy, it's maybe less burdensome than it was. We have wildly different points of view on this, but they're still there. And you can't just go, oh, they've all gone away. We have a businessman in the White House. We don't have to do anything. No, not at all.
I think it's an important point to bring up on the reg side. A lot of that and the bottom line will translate into news headlines. And Washington is a power base for, media activity. And I think that we go into that a little more in our article about, how the media impact and how you have to message and communicate in the Washington circuit. And that is an important function of government relations, not just your communications teams.
Right. Well, your competitors, are they just going to sit back and go, well, Association A isn't involved, we're Association B, we're not going to be involved? No, they are out there. It is a dog-eat-dog competitive environment in business. And I just put some of my favorite examples. When I was at the National Association of Broadcasters, we had the Cable Association, two cable associations, the American Cable Association, the Internet and Television Association, which are the large cable companies, constantly competing at the FCC on Capitol Hill. We were looking for market share. We were trying to do everything. We wanted to keep viewers. They wanted to take viewers. We fought over the pricing of programs that they would use when they took our viewers. So it was very competitive. And if we just said, oh, we're just going to step away from this, it would do a great disservice, and it would be a financial disaster for the television industry. But let's just say, David, forget about television. I don't watch it anymore. I now watch everything on the Internet. Think about the Dairy Foods Association. For years, they've been in a struggle with the Sugar Association because they're talking about the component parts of ice cream. What's a big portion of ice cream? Sugar. Sugar wants to be paid more. Dairy wants sugar to be paid less with the sugar loan program. So there's all sorts of kind of competitive things going on in business which are impacted by how government acts.
Yep, and then of course, time and attention of members of Congress. You're competing over that with the, number of meetings that staff are taking. You want to be there at the forefront. You want that member-level meeting.
Right.
You want to showcase your organization as being this GR powerhouse, and that your competitors are second tier, third tier, and they follow the lead of what you're doing. So it's a perception issue, and that perception issue a lot of times will translate into membership.
Right.
If you're an association and your member has the choice, should I join X organization or Y organization? You need to have a strong GR presence, because you can say, at the end of the day, we fought for this regulation, we fought for this piece of legislation, and we were on the forefront and successful, whereas brand X was not.
Right. So if you have a chance with a pencil and paper, write down the word competitive, and under that write legislation, regulation, media, industry media, and our reputation. All those are in danger, and this is a reason why you want to have really good, solid government relations, because those are the frontline people here in Washington who protect or advance many of those ideas. Well, how do you quantify the impact of government relations? And I'm sure many of you with us today have all sorts of different ideas. You may be doing it. I hope we figure out a way that you could share them with Joshua and I. We'd love to add them in an article without, if you want us to reference you, we can. If you don't, that would be fine too, if you want to keep it a secret. But I think it's important for the whole government relations industry to be better at sharing best practices. So I learned I had a great experience lobbying at the National Federation of Independent Business. These are small business people, hundreds of thousands of them, who pay on average less than $200 a year to be a member of this organization. And we would go out and we would sell membership, and people would look at you like, well, why should I be a member? And it taught me how to quantify the cost of legislation and regulation, because you can. We can quantify everything. But we would oppose, let's say, you might be disagreeing with me on this, but we would oppose a minimum wage increase of $1. Well, we then knew that this bill, H.R. 1, hypothetically, would be $1 per 1 hour for one employee, $3,000 or 3,000 hours a year. So roughly $3,000 more that a small business person would have to pay. Can't just push it on to their customers. They would have to figure out how to adjust their costs. And then when you went in to see somebody, you'd say, well, how many employees do you have? And they'd say 10. And you say, well, the reason to join the NFIB is because on this particular bill, if this becomes enacted into law, that's 3,000 times 10. How much did that cost you? And they'd be going, $30,000. And you say, well, and the membership to join and be in the fight is $200. And generally they go, let me get my checkbook. This was before credit card, by the way. But, you know, so it gave me this, and I did this at the beer wholesalers, I did this at the broadcasters, because it's very real to people. Now, there are some caveats in, which is why we have the slide up. It needs to reflect reality. Sometimes people get so enthusiastic, they'll be like, this bill is going to cost our industry $47 gazillion. And they go visit someone whose, you know, entire wealth is like $3,000. And when you look at that person and go, you should join because this is going to cost $3 gazillion if it gets passed. And they're like, yeah, but I'm only worth $3,000. It's just not real. They don't feel it. So it has to reflect reality. Whatever you do is going to become public because everything is transparent these days. And so you need to be prepared for that. It connects you to success of the effort. So when you're able, we at the NFIB repealed, I think, the only health care law ever, Section 89. No one said it could be done. We did it. It was great. But it then connects you to success, and you could report back to everybody that you saved them, in effect, this amount of money. You need to have objective pricing. You should be reminding the leadership of cost of this, your own people. Well, why are we doing this? Well, because this bill costs us this much, this bill costs us that much. You total this up, that's a lot of money compared to, you know, the $400,000 we're spending on government relations or whatever it is, because it's usually a big trade-off. And then when you're successful, it allows you to go back to them, you know, what's the old adage? You tell the person, you tell them what you told them, and then you tell them again. You're reminding the people of value. And most people go, yeah, that's a great idea. At the beer wholesalers, I sometimes try to think out of the box. At the beer wholesalers, we had a few people that wouldn't join. They didn't see the cost of things. So finally I called them up and I said, okay, I'm giving you a money-back guarantee right now. You join, you pay the money, and 1 year from now, if you don't think it's valuable, you call me up, I'll give you all your money back. So the only thing you're losing is the interest float on that amount, which the interest rates were like 2% or 3% or whatever they were. It wasn't very much. They all joined. No one ever asked for their money back because I broke through the clutter, got to them, and then it forced us all to constantly think about how do we deliver value to people because they could quit.
And I think another point to that, in demonstrating value, a lot of times in the grassroots side of things, when I was at the American Motorcyclist Association, it was $49 a year membership. It came with a magazine, and we would like to joke in government relations, we're more than just a magazine. We are here in D.C. We are fighting for your right to ride.
Yes.
But grassroots, you feel a part of something. You feel part of a movement and a connection with the government relations function.
Right.
So if you're that person, it might be a pain to receive an email or a call to action all the time, but if you're doing it right and you have somebody that knows what they're doing in the advocacy grassroots role and you're getting it in a target time, you'll create that movement effect. You'll have your own community, and they will take your information and proliferate it out there. A lot of times it's just doing that initial bit, and then your membership will share it, and they'll tell their story and your story for you.
Yeah, that's excellent. That's excellent. Have those you attempt to influence make the case. Now, this is a real fun one for me personally. But, your job is to build relationships with people, with staff, with members, people in organizations, coalitions. So what can they do? What's legitimately they can do to help you impress upon people the value of government relations? I just have a couple stories here. It won't take very long, but they're fun. So members of Congress love to meet with people, particularly people who are CEOs of companies or who run associations, because you can hear in the background, ooh, potential fundraiser. There's no quid pro quo here, but they like to make friends. Everyone wants to make friends, right? So maybe invite a member of Congress who they don't have to be the Speaker of the House. Maybe they're on a minor committee, but they like you. They're very helpful. Maybe they're from your industry. I know the Dental Association has a number of dentists who serve in Congress, and they love to come to meet with dental people because that's their business, right? So maybe you invite a member, you're in Washington for a meeting, not a fly-in, maybe you're having a board meeting, they come over, I think you could send a car for them, but you need to figure all that out ethically, as I don't want to get in anyone's trouble. But they come over and they just kind of light up, and you give them a couple talking points, but you can't tell them, here's what I need you to say. Tell them I'm, better than sliced bread. They'll figure that out, and they'll say, authentically, I have a good working relationship with Joshua and with David. They're great. All they have to say to your leadership is, when I have a problem, they are the first call. Because the leadership is then hearing, woo, we got a powerful crew here. They're doing the right thing. They're protecting our interests. And I did that at the NAB all the time. We had Joe Crowley come. We had the chairman of the Energy and Commerce Committee come. It was always great for the board. And because I knew them all, they always would, even non-pitch, like, Joe, you got to say something good about it. They always would say something good about you because they're polite, decent people. Call your leadership. Okay, let's say you can't get them a car, they don't want to travel across town. Just say, Congressman, it'd really be helpful to me, and I'm sure helpful to you, if you called the president of my association. Here's his background when you get a chance. Or even if you don't call him, leave him a message. It's outstanding the impression you can give to people if, you call them at night. I used to do this with some of my members all the time. I want them to think I was like working 24/7 for them. And I call them at night, leave messages on their telephone machine. Hey, Bob, this is David. Late here at the NAB, but I want you to know we're working for you, right? And I'm sure some of them chuckled, but most of these people in business are innately salesmen. And they love to be sold because they're salespeople or saleswomen. And it was a great technique, but you can maybe get a member or even in some cases staff to call and say, hi, this is Bob. I'm on the Ways and Means Committee. I was just calling to check in with you. How many CEOs or association leaders in the country get calls, non-money calls, but calls from members of Congress or senior people saying, hey, I really appreciate working with you. I appreciate your staff. David's a really good guy, all that. I mean, this is like, I saw I'll not name the member, but I saw a member at a fly-in, and he didn't really like the lobbyist. But they brought in the CEO of this very large company, and the lobbyist was kind of sitting in the back corner thinking, oh, my God. And the member comes in, shakes hands with the CEO, and goes, I'll use a different name. Bob walks over to him, so good to see you. You know, and they get the part. They understand the part that they're playing and say, you know, you have a great team here. We really respect you. Well, that company has a huge presence in that congressional district. So that person's never, even if they loathe the person, they're never going to say, this is a terrible person, you should fire him, because you have no idea, maybe he's best friends with the CEO, maybe he's, you know, leadership in the company. So they're always going to take the high road and go, does a great job, I really appreciate it, great company, and it works well for everybody. Send a letter to your leadership. We want to be sure we have plenty of time for questions too, and hopefully you're thinking of your questions now. Send a letter to your leadership. So in this reference of repeal of Section 89, we had about 100 different coalitions, all who joined us. It ended up being an unbelievable vote. It was one of the few times, and I had a lot of respect for former Congressman Dan McCoskey from Illinois, but he was a big man. He was very influential. He kind of was intimidating when you saw him. And I remember on the day of the vote, which we won like 400 to 35 or something. It was a crushing defeat. He went to the floor and he said, there are interests outside this floor that are steering this legislation, whatever. I mean, it was a big deal because nobody thought we could do it. We went back to the office and I said, okay, right now, we were the head of the coalition. We had John Sloan, who was the president of the NFIB. I said, Mr. Sloan, everyone was happy. I said, I need your help with something. He goes, what, Dave? I said, I want to research the president or leader of the association for every one of these organizations and do a personalized thank you letter to them referencing their lobbyists. He's like, oh, yeah, that's no problem. So we did like a generic letter. We put the names in. And I remember at the time, it wasn't Northrop Grumman. It was Northrop Corporation. John Sloan, the president of the NFIB, sent the CEO of Northrop Corporation a letter saying, you know, we had this victory. This victory would not be possible if it wasn't for Rex Wackerly, who at the time, he's a good friend of mine, but at the time was the lobbyist for Northrop Corporation. And I remember Rex saying, I hope this is okay to say it public, it's been many years now, is that he said the president wrote a note on there and called him and said, this is great stuff. This is why we have you and we have the government relations team. And that gave me the idea of we probably don't all think about leveraging all of the people we work with in coalitions, because after that point, if I had another issue, I could probably easily go back to them and say, hey, we need you up again. Because they're going to go, oh, what did I get last time? I worked really hard. I got a result for my company, but I also got the praise and adoration of my CEO, which is sometimes very hard for people in large corporations. Rex himself is a great lobbyist. He now works at Prudential. He's done extremely well, whether he would have gotten the letter or not. But that was just something that clued me in on, here's a tool that everyone has to use that works. And then, I want to mention one more thing, because I'm getting we've got to come to the end here, David. But my all-time favorite example is former Congressman Henry Bonilla. He was a congressman on the Appropriations Committee from Texas, a really good guy. And I remember I asked him to come to the fly-in, the beer wholesalers fly-in. And we had about 1,000 people there. It was really exciting. And Henry's wearing a blue blazer. And he's like, hey, David, thanks for being here. And I said, Henry, thanks you for coming. It's great that you're here, blah, 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 blah. And I introduced him. I said, he's a great friend of beer wholesalers. And as he's at the podium, he takes off his blue blazer, and he has a beer wholesalers polo shirt on. And you think, well, what's the big deal? And he says something like, I don't know how I can be better than this. And the crowd goes nuts, because they're thinking every member of Congress has a beer wholesalers polo shirt. And it was awesome. I mean, people were applauding, standing up, but it got all of our PAC donors, our board, our leadership. No one ever said, hey, David, how much are we paying you to be on Capitol Hill? You know, because they demonstrated the result. That was awesome. He was an awesome guy and is an awesome guy to this day.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for the enthusiasm.
Yes,
I'm almost ready to applaud myself. I don't know how much we've done for upgrading the swamp here today, but nonetheless.
We had lessons in human psychology. We have to do the compliance webinar next. There's a few things that we have to come back to on that. But I think, putting it all together, we talked about performance metrics and some of the different things that we track in the beginning, and then also anecdotal stories to really piece it together.
Right, that's exactly right. And I'm sorry if I get enthusiastic, but I love advocacy. I think it's so great, constitutionally protected. That's what makes America special, despite the fact that many people think we're a swamp. And back to you.
We love enthusiasm here. So to maybe calm it down a little bit here, we're going to go over to Megan, and she's going to show you a little bit about how you can kind of report on some of those metrics we mentioned earlier. And then we will go to questions. And I know David said, get your questions ready, and I've got a bunch myself. So over to Megan.
I like to think I'm enthusiastic.
You are enthusiastic.
You are.
So as Ian mentioned, I work a lot with lots of associations and nonprofits and corporations on their digital advocacy. And in doing that, I see a lot of the things that people are up against when they're trying to justify their existence and communicate what they do, both up and out. So the most important thing that you should be getting out of your advocacy software to do this is being able to set your own benchmarks. Because if you do not set your own benchmarks, they will be set for you, and they will not be based in fact. I have conversations all the time where a board comes to a grassroots professional and says, well, we need our email open rates to be 40%, which is insane. That's an insane number. But because they didn't set expectations ahead of time, they're not able to counteract that. So use your software to look at your reporting tools, figure out what historically is a good and realistic number for you. Should you be building year over year? Absolutely. If you are below industry standards in these various benchmarks, like your email open rate or your click-through rate, which is people who click on your calls to actions in your emails, or your response rate, which is the people who go from opening your emails to clicking on your emails to taking whatever action you've asked them to take. Make sure that you're making plans to come back up to that industry standard level. That's a good place to start. If you're already there, think about incremental ways you can increase it, and make a plan to do so. So Anne, with the connectivity blog, and also this webinar series and the work that Josh does, there's a lot of really great information out there on how you can improve your game, both from a grassroots perspective, but even from a marketing perspective, making sure that you're writing content that is really compelling to people. Reporting on that incremental growth is huge. And so you want to think about how your success is different based on the size of your organization. And so success may be 20 new people for one organization, maybe 20,000 for another. So make sure you're reporting that database growth in percentages, and make sure you're reporting your advocacy growth by your campaign and not by the date, because as we know, your legislation can come up when it comes up, and you're going to see responses during that time. So thinking about it from a business perspective, which a lot of these CEOs will, yearly, quarterly, monthly, doesn't often make sense and isn't going to give you the best story. So being able to show differences in that way is very, very important. These response rates you can also get really creative with, and so we talked a little bit about the importance of quality of communication. So look at the number of people who have taken action and customized the letter is a really great metric and tells a really compelling story on how you're improving the quality of your database. If your numbers aren't great for those opens and clicks and response rates, take a look at the type of people who are actually performing those actions in the past year, 2 years, and maybe trim out the people who aren't really participating. Bring that number back to what would be a good rate by getting rid of the people who are bogging you down. And within our Engage products, we do a lot of out-of-the-box reporting, things you can do really quickly, a couple clicks, and get a look at your metrics, understand your growth over time. But you can also really dig in and do a lot of custom work to find people who did things like change the messaging of your call to action. Communicating and educating. So we think education is really important here at CQ. That's why we give you lots of tools to be able to educate your advocate database on things like legislation, your issue areas. And so you want to be taking that same mentality to the people that you are advocating for and educate these people within your organization. And so make sure that you're telling what you're doing. So I'm asking people to take action on digital calls to action. These are the types of conversations I'm having. This is why we're doing it. Why should we care? We're all in this every day. And we have to remember that not everyone else is or even has a frame of reference for what we do. And then communicating what the impact is also really important. So great, you're doing all this stuff. Why do I care? How does it affect me? How does it affect our business? And why should we continue investing in you? And this is something that's true of all executive communication, no matter what industry you're in. So in my own industry, I like to think, I call it the public radio explanation. And so when I'm telling people what we're doing, why we're doing it, I'm never going to assume that they know what I'm talking about. I'm going to, very non-judgmentally, going to say, explain the word I just said, because they may not have a context for it. They definitely won't have a context for specific legislation. And so saying, Terry Gross stopping someone and explaining what a touchdown is important in these meetings as well. And it's very important to keep that in mind if you want people to understand what your impact is. In addition to communicating up, you also want to make sure that you're communicating out. And so letting your colleagues know, letting your membership know what you're doing and why you're doing, not just asking them to help out, get involved, but that same understanding of why we're doing things. And something that we've seen people do that's really compelling is quarterly government relations calls. So people can get on, do an internal webinar, understand what you're doing, why you're doing it. That content is there. People who are interested will get interested. They can also help. Yeah. They can also help communicate that out. And that also helps communicate things up because you're creating a narrative within your organization. And the nice thing about that, reuse that content. So content is hard for everyone to come up with. I know it's a big struggle for people in this field. And so once you've created that content, you can use it on your outgoing communications, on your sites, on your calls to action, and really help people understand what they're doing and how they're impacting things. This is just an example, again, of something that we offer within Engage, so you can easily link people to information about bills and votes they wouldn't easily have access to.
I can get in and look at some questions, but I did want to kick it off. I'm glad you mentioned, Megan, reporting up, because we talked earlier about that kind of briefing the boss. But very often the boss is not your direct CEO when you're in government relations, right? Maybe you have a boss within that department. So how do you kind of get to your CEO? How do you brief your CEO? How do you kind of cultivate that relationship? And I think kind of following on from that, so it's kind of a two-part question, is how do you figure out what is the bottom line for folks who are not of, say, a sales and marketing bent, who are in GR? How do you figure out what's that kind of thing that's going to be most important to the executive team?
Yeah, I think, having the information that I share with my colleagues in government relations, which then gets reported to the CEO, I think that's where a lot of that refinement has to take place, not over-inundating the folks that you work with directly. But another tactic that I find most useful is within our own publications that are going to members. Our CEO is reading that. That's important material. Yeah. That's what they care about. Yeah. So, like, if we're contributed in the grassroots sense, this number of meetings, this is a key anecdote, and it's going into the publications within the organization, I know that our leadership is reading it.
Yeah. Let me suggest a couple things. Number one, if you're not setting performance metrics as a GR person, you should. What do I mean by that? Number of meetings with members, number of PAC events you go to, number of grassroots meetings you have, number of people coming to your fly-in. Not because the numbers are themselves important, they are, but because it keeps you focused. So much clutter's going to Capitol Hill. As advocates, there's clutter all around us, too. And I like to think at the NAB, I had minimum numbers that each of our lobbyists, we had like 5 lobbyists, they had like 110 meetings that they had to have with every member of Congress. That was like a no-brainer. You could do that. You have to work at it, but then they're sitting downtown. It's raining outside. They've got a meeting at 2:45. They're thinking to themselves, should I just cancel this? It's kind of an ugly day. I'll get back to it. When they're going, oh, no, I got the metrics. I got to meet the metrics. And I think it keeps people focused, but they have to have something. Sometimes I run into people who say, well, you can't really measure government relations because it's the one time when you're standing with the person on the corner and you say, can you do this? And they say yes, and it saves, the planet. That doesn't really happen. I think you want to be able to, it just gives you at the end of the year when you review people, you could say, well, here's where we were good, here's where we can improve. If they're not working out at all and diminishing the hard work of the rest of your team, you have to take some action on that. So set some metrics. Plus, if you set metrics and you're proactive with the metrics, your leadership will like it. Make anyone a $100 bet. If they do it and they don't like it, I'll pay them $100 out of my personal pocket. It'll never happen. Secondly, I think you need to think in terms of what's your competition doing. I like to talk about advocacy as a competitive market. You think, David, that you're an economist, that's just crazy, but we're a competitive market. And time is either being spent on you and your issues and your concerns and your grassroots, or it's being spent on other people, some of whom could be your competitors.
Yeah, and that's an important point. I'm looking at within the industry,
right?
What are the other players doing? How many messages are they sending? Are we leading this coalition? Are we leading this fight? Do my numbers stack up against theirs? How about other associations or organizations outside of this? Is the pharmaceutical companies leading, or,
right.
Where do I fit into the overall government relations puzzle? And those metrics provide that. And I agree with you, that those stories of having a North Star and a guiding metric are very important, because at the end of the day, those little quips where you're going to meet someone on the corner, that's not going to move the needle.
Right. And all you do, so if you think about, well, let's not have metrics. What do you do all year? All you do is play defense. You wait for the calls, you get emails, you never get on offense. If you want to win, you got to be on offense. And the only way I think you get on offense is to be focused and to be metric-based.
Okay, one other question. What are some ways government relations departments can better message their work to other departments in the organization?
Yeah, I think that a lot of people will have staff meetings within their organizations where one department will present, offer it up as the opportunity for government relations to talk about what they do, educate people. In grassroots, I'm creating programs that are to educate our members about government relations in general. Some of those materials provide a dual purpose. If you're working in another sector of the organization, you might not have the best civics background, and you might need that 101 information. So, those tools and resources, again, the industry publications that are within your organization, those are invaluable. They're critical to use. They're critical to get those internal resources out there. When I was at the American Diabetes Association, part of my role and part of my title was internal engagement, getting all the employees involved with advocacy. And I think anybody in grassroots, that's where it starts. If you have 20 employees, or if you have 110 employees, or 1,000 or 2,000 employees, if it starts there and getting them to tweet and retweet, for example, all of our action alerts and a lot of our media will be sent out in an internal communication with a click-to-tweet link right there. So we can start that conversation and get that out there, and then hopefully other people that are related to the organization or our members get involved. But really, having a good start within your organization will amplify your message in the long run.
Right, I think that's great, and you want to make it easy for people to tweet.
Yep, absolutely.
Because if they have to copy things, I know I'll copy stuff, and then it gets lost, and you're just frustrated, you can't log into Twitter, and then you just don't do it, and you lose that opportunity.
Yeah. As
opposed to just clicking, click to tweet. I would offer maybe 2 or 3 things. Number one, I think it's important for the GR, the head of the office or the head of the GR opportunity to be at an annual meeting at the beginning of the year and posting all of the goals and the metrics and what we're trying to do. And then throughout the year, remind people what the cost of this is. I know that I was on the board of the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation. It's a great organization. They're trying to solve juvenile diabetes for type 1. And they would talk about they really were invested in trying to get an investment of $200 million from the government to do research. Now, they raised $100 million, so it's like we're doing $100 million, you give us $200 million, we can do a lot more with $300 million. But it was brought up at the meetings. Where are we? How are we doing? And it wasn't just we had a person stand up and go, it's fine, but they kind of gave the board, the leadership of the organization of, here's where we are, here's our next step, this is a potential problem, we'll be back. But it it told a narrative throughout the year, which I thought was very influential because I never thought about what are they doing. I know what they're doing. I just then got to the point of how can I help them do it. So number 2, I would think about doing it at subsequent meetings. And then number 3, people love victory. When you are successful, when you get, we had a metric for all of our lobbyists every year on co-sponsors. Bill gets introduced, first year your job was to get co-sponsors, 10. Next year it was to get 20. Next year it was get 30, for whatever it is. And if you have 5 or 6 people or 2 people, that adds up to a lot of folks. And everyone, they might not be able to get 200 co-sponsors, but they surely can get 10. And we would report, last year we had 100. This year we have 135. And it's I think a lot about lobbying and influencing Congress is demonstrating forward momentum. And if you're able to demonstrate legitimate forward momentum, that kind of creates a stone that's rolling down the hill. I'm sure I'm messing up a lot of metaphors here, but but the idea is that people like success, they like forward momentum, they like progress. What they don't like is somebody explaining why we're not competing.
And just one more point on that, and I always do a annual report, so like a 2017 annual report, and it's a one-pager. Like I have one that's more detailed, but this one-pager at the top, you'll see 3 or 4 key metrics. So like 40% increase in digital activations. Maybe we had a marquee petition where we had 10,000 signers. So those will appear at the top, and then I'll have like 4 sections with a paragraph explaining this was the goal, this is how we achieved it, and this is what we're going to do next year to keep that up. And then in between it, to keep it very visually oriented, I have headers, infographics, all of the visual elements in between of this is the material that resulted into this. So you have a snapshot. I present at our different meetings to our committees, and I go into the room. This is where we were last year. This is where we're heading. Here are some key points, and we did it in a fun and interactive way. And like a lot of the stuff that we're doing, it might not be directly related in the visual sense to community banking. It has a connection. Like we've run campaigns right at the start of baseball season, 3 strikes and you're out, and it relates to the issue itself. Right. So like that is in there, and it explains it a little bit more.
Okay, I wanted to get one more.
Okay,
sorry to cut you off.
No, go ahead. I want to add one thing that.
Sure. So are there different metrics to look at for organizations that do not have grassroots members? And I want to give one example as an answer to this is an organization called SPAN, who are heavily involved in legislation at a state level for opioids and for pain management. And so they went from tracking 4 or 5 bills 5 years ago to tracking 1,400 regulations and bills now at a state level. But again, they don't have a grassroots metric to show. But that, for example, is a huge metric to show, right? It's
in and of itself is a huge
in and of itself. Yeah. And they also have 200 partner organizations who sign on to the policy that they're trying to, get the states to adopt and stuff. And so that partnership group, which is everybody from the AMA to, very big names, they can show that as a kind of a metric that's growing consistently over the year and who they're getting to sign on. So those are just some things. Sometimes if you're just in the weeds with policy, it's harder to kind of show those metrics.
Yeah, I think we've talked about this before. You have the meetings, you have the co-sponsor, some of those type of metrics that are more policy-oriented. But outside of that, if you don't have a grassroots program, I'd also look to the press. Like how many interactions are you in the Wall Street Journal, or are you in your state local newspaper, and compare that year to year or over an interval of time.
Right. I don't know how big the organization is, but 1,400 bills is a lot of bills. I mean, it's good news because a lot's happening. It's really bad news because it's so terrible when people have this problem. I mean, it's awful. But I would focus. I would pick maybe the 3 or 4 states that kind of create the momentum for all the other states. Maybe work with the state attorneys generals or all the different state organizations, of which there are many, where you could have a presence. Sometimes if you do a presentation at state attorney generals, other state attorney generals will go, that's a great idea, I want to do that as well. But I still think the idea of kind of measuring bills, measuring clippings, measuring you could testify, or you could take your testimony, you could send it to all 50 states and ask to be put in records, because I'm sure everyone's having hearings on the opioid crisis. So you're seen everywhere. Let me just go back. I know we're going to come close on time here, and I apologize for my enthusiasm. But when Josh said the importance of a one-pager, in the old days, more paper meant they think we're doing more. These days, more paper thinks they're hiding what they're doing. A prominent CEO just told me recently that he went to his meeting, and it was for another organization, and they brought in about 4 inches of paper of things that they've been doing. And he said, he looked at me and just said, David, they're not doing anything. That's just to give us the appearance that they're busy. So don't think, take away, if nothing else today, is more paper does not mean doing more. Doing more means doing more, and being able to put it in a simple way to explain to people.
Okay, great. Well, we're going to have to leave it there, but thank you again, everyone, for joining us, and thanks to David Rehr and to Joshua Habersky and Megan McCoskey, and hopefully you will join us next time. Thanks, everyone.